Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell, editor of The Conversation. For democracy to work, people need to be well informed. That's why we work with academic experts to share their research and explain issues in the news. Everything we do is free to republish, but we need your support. Please donate to The Conversation by going to donate.theconversation.com or following the link in the show notes.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
After a coup by the Liberals' Conservative faction, the party has replaced Susan Lee, who had dire polling, with a Conservative leader in Angus Taylor. Jane Hume, from the moderate side of the party, has won the position of deputy. It was quite an achievement, given that she's a senator. Hume's victory came after a rugged past year for her, with mistakes in the election campaign, followed by then being dumped by Lee to the backbench. Now, back in a big way, Hume takes on the shadow portfolio of employment, industrial relations, productivity and deregulation, which will give her a major role in the economic debate. Jane Hume joins us today. Jane Hume, you're a prominent Liberal moderate. How are the moderates feeling that they've come out of this frontbench reshuffle?
I think that it's really important after any leadership challenge or a spill or a reshuffle that there isn't a winner-takes-all approach. And I'm certain that that's not what Angus Taylor has done here. He really has raised a lot of my more moderate colleagues to quite senior positions. And of course, the best example of that is Tim Wilson, who has now taken on the very important role of Shadow Treasurer. So he will be the key spokesperson for our economic message, which is so important at the moment. But there are other more moderate Liberals that have come to the fore, people like Andrew Bragg taking on both environment as well as housing. That's a very important role. And so I wouldn't be surprised if my colleagues are quite comfortable with the way that the front bench has panned out. It was certainly done on a skills matrix basis. What was it that we are trying to achieve? What is it that we're trying to achieve? What are the messages that we want to prosecute, and who's the best person to prosecute them?
Now, I want to move to your shadow portfolio, which covers employment, industrial relations, productivity and deregulation. And start with productivity. Australia is not alone in grappling with this slowdown in productivity growth over the past 15 years or so. Why do you think so many developed countries are struggling with this productivity issue since the GFC?
There is no doubt that Australia has struggled with productivity growth for some time now, although we have actually gone backwards in productivity in Australia, unlike a lot of our competitor developed nations. That is a genuine concern. I think that there's been a lot of hope for productivity, particularly with the advent of new technologies, that simply hasn't come to pass. And that's a real problem. When productivity is low, it means that one of the biggest drivers of growth has diminished, and particularly the driver of growth that you can have without having inflationary pressures as well. So we need to find a solution to this. What is the solution? Well, I think actually the biggest one is probably in regulation and deregulation. In the last 15 years, we seem to have really shackled our private sector with new layers of compliance, massive layers of expectations, massive expectations of what it is that they will deliver on top of their core business, whether it be to government, whether it be to shareholders. And at some stage, we've got to say something's got to give. I met with a number of directors of a listed company recently who said to me that just the sheer reporting to government and government only was costing their business around $13 million a year, whether it be on gender targets or climate targets or modern slavery. All of these things are noble individually. They're noble objectives, but surely there's a better way to deliver it if it's going to cost consumers in the end, because that's who those higher costs and those higher prices get passed on to. If it's going to cost consumers in the end, we have to find a better way.
But there is a dilemma here, isn't there? And we've talked with Jim Chalmers about this in previous podcasts, and that is there's a feeling we must have more deregulation or less regulation, and yet regularly the communities demanding more regulation. For example, when problems became very evident in the childcare sector, people immediately said, we need more regulation.
They did, but I'm not entirely certain they knew what the type of regulation that they wanted was actually the type of regulation that was being delivered. If you want to raise safety standards, I think that's a really good thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to wrap up the childcare centre itself with red tape and more obligations. There are other ways of doing that, and government can play a role there to make it simpler to decentralise or re-centralise regulations so that costs aren't always passed on to consumers, because as regulation increases in, say, for instance, the childcare centre, costs of childcare have also been going up.
You will, of course, have read the Abundance book.
I have to admit that I started the Abundance book. It does become a little bit repetitive after a while, but, I think that Klein is certainly very popular amongst some of my colleagues, let's put it that way.
Now, you mentioned technology. AI is often hailed as a potential cure or partial cure for some of the productivity woes. Are you optimistic about the potential of AI in this area? And what more does government need to do to get this right?
I am very optimistic about the potential cure of not just AI, but technology more broadly. And my colleague, Aaron Violi, who feels very passionately about this, is now the new Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy and Cybersecurity and AI, amongst other things. Australia was actually at the forefront of building a principles framework around AI to try and reduce the risks that come with it, because there's no doubt that there are risks too with this kind of technology, and establishing a broad-based set of principles around which AI should be used, I think was a really important conversation to have. Just things like being able to say, well, if you use AI for any particular purpose, you should be able to, your average Joe punter should be able to identify that it's AI. You should have a single person or organisation or entity that is accountable for AI. These are all, I think, really important. At the end of the day, it's humans that make the decisions, and somebody has to be accountable for those decisions. You can't simply go and blame technology. That's a good starting principle. But the rapid adoption of AI, I think, is actually a really exciting prospect for businesses if they are looking for that productivity turnaround. The question is how it affects the labour market and how quickly we can adapt.
On another area of your portfolio, industrial relations, obviously Labor has delivered a lot since it was elected to the union movement and to workers, and the Liberals have opposed a number of these measures. This includes facilitating multi-employer bargaining, same job, same pay, and right to disconnect legislation. Over the years, I think it's fair to say the coalition has been variously very gung-ho on IR and at other times quite timid. In general terms, do you think that the next coalition government, whenever that might come, should seek to wind back the present industrial relations regime, or is that just too hard a thing to do?
Well, I certainly want to understand how some of the industrial relations reforms that were brought in by the Albanese government are playing out in the market. And I will be speaking to companies that are directly affected by those laws over the next coming weeks. I'll also be speaking to, and have already put in a call into, some of the unions that rely on those laws and how they have seen their effect play out as well. I can understand why previous coalition governments have been timid on industrial relations reform. They are still scarred by WorkChoices back in 2007, and it's an easy slogan, I think, for Labor governments to throw, or Labor oppositions to throw at Liberals and at the coalition. I'm really not interested in revisiting WorkChoices. I'm very much interested, though, in looking at job opportunities and career opportunities. What is it that my kids and their kids are going to be looking for in a workplace in the next 10 years, 20 years and 30 years? How do we get our industrial relations system working for both employees and employers. And to some extent, I think that requires a new level of imagination. We want workplace flexibility. We want our employers to be able to offer us all sorts of incentives to be able to come into work, to be able to, stay within, retention programs. There are lots of different ways of doing this that aren't necessarily old style, old school, militant union-driven demands. So that's the focus that I would like to take.
Do you think, though, particularly, say, multi-employer bargaining needs to be wound back?
I have yet to see how multi-employer bargaining has played out in some of those very important sectors that we are going to need, particularly as our defence industry capabilities dramatically increase. How will multi-sector bargaining affect the AUKUS rollout, for instance, and the manufacturing sectors that we are going to need to encourage while that program is, front and centre? So that's why I'm going to be speaking to both the employers and the workers to understand better how these programs have been implemented, where they work and where they don't work. We know that our industrial relations system isn't perfect, and we also know that labour productivity is the greatest driver of growth. It is the greatest driver of growth. And unless we get our labour productivity right, we will be doomed to a future of low economic growth. And if you do that, well, all Australians should be expect to be a little less prosperous, a little less rich, a little less opportunity in the future. I don't think that that's the promise of the Australia that I want to see. And it's certainly not the promise of an Australia that Angus Taylor wants to see.
Now, of course, at the last election, your policy to bring Canberra public servants back into office had to be dumped mid-campaign, and it's not coalition policy now and presumably won't be at the next election. But more generally, what effect do you think that the work from home trend that's been so strong in recent times is having on Australian business and the Australian economy? Do you think that it's a net positive or a net negative?
I certainly think that flexible workplace practices have the opportunity to add a lot of value and add productivity. You can bring in the right skill sets and attract workers that you may never have been able to attract before. That's a really exciting opportunity. But it is something that should be worked out between an employer and an employee. It has to work for everybody. And indeed, the original policy that you referred to, that was exactly what it was about. It was about making sure that working from home works for not just the employee, but also their team and their manager and the broader organisation to make it was the public service, but in this case, it's the private sector, as effective as possible. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable desire of the private sector businesses that I've spoken to.
I want to turn to the Liberals' challenge of trying to appeal to female voters. In your maiden speech, you said, and I quote, "Female representation in federal and state parliaments is still woefully inadequate," unquote. Now, obviously, the idea of quotas now seems dead in the Liberal Party. In 2022, after the election, you co-authored a review that urged targets. But so far, that doesn't seem to have achieved much progress. And after Susan Lee departs, you will have 5 Liberal women in the lower house. Are you disappointed that the Liberals haven't been able to do more? And do you have any other suggestions to come up with?
So there's a couple of things to unpack there. One is I fundamentally believe that we need more women in Parliament from every party, not just the Liberal Party. Women's voices are more than 50% of the Australian population. It's really important that their voices are heard loudly and clearly in the places where decisions get made about their lives. And I have always been a champion of women within my party, intentionally. I said in that same maiden speech that I would never pull the ladder up behind me. And I have abided by that for 10 years now. We do need to do more. The 2022 election review said that targets should be an appropriate way to get there. And that was over 10 years. We wanted to see 50% representation. It's tough to get there if you go backwards in the polls. You don't just lose women, you lose female candidates that would have been and made enormous contributions. And you can lose sitting members too. At the last election, we had some just fantastic female candidates, and lots of them in places like Bradfield and Warringah and Wentworth and Boothby and Kooyong. I mean, really good seats that, had the electoral tide been working with us, would have had amazingly fruitful and of careers within the parliament for a very long time. But that didn't happen. We went the other way. The other thing to unpack, though, is that when we talk about female representations, it's almost like people say the word quotas in the same breath. And it's not that binary. You can't have very pro-women and quotas or nothing. I mean, there are so many different ways of doing this, and quotas is only one way. And it's one that doesn't necessarily suit the culture or the nature of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is a grassroots organisation that makes decisions from the bottom up, unlike, say, the Labor Party, which makes decisions from the top down. If you have a top-down organisation, you can demand a particular outcome. The person at the top can demand a particular outcome. But in a grassroots organisation where the decisions come from the bottom up, it's very hard to fashion that. It is a much bigger cultural shift. But it is important to make that cultural shift, because otherwise you can change the numbers, but you don't change the culture. And to be honest, I think that the women that I know within the Liberal Party, both those that aspire to be in Parliament and those that are already there, would feel a level of insult if they felt that they needed special dispensation just for their presence. And it also diminishes people, I think, in the eyes of their colleagues. If somebody feels, oh, well, she only got there because of the quota, well, I hate that idea. I love the fact that I know that I got to where I am on merit alone, and that my female colleagues did the same. It makes us more powerful, more confident, and more able to do our jobs.
Well, in terms of the by-election that's coming up in Farrer, do you think that the Liberals need a female candidate to increase their competitiveness in that contest?
There's no doubt that female candidates are hard workers, they're great communicators, they feel very representative of the community, and they tend to know their communities extremely well. So a female candidate would be terrific. But to go back to my previous point, it's not up to me to choose the candidate for the Farrer by-election. That is up to the party organisation, the members. It's one of the true honours of being a member of the Liberal Party is being able to choose your local member yourself. So if anybody wants to join the Liberal Party, wants to see better representation in their area, come and join the Liberal Party, and you get to choose your candidate.
But you would like to see a female candidate?
I'd like to see female candidates in every seat across the country, Michelle, because the more women we have in Parliament, the better represented women's voices are. That said, it's not up to me, it's up to party members. And as I said, one of the great honours and responsibility of being a Liberal Party member is you get to choose. We want to maintain that. But I think that people are beginning to see just how well our female candidates can perform. And you don't need to look very far. I think of Amelia Hamer in Kooyong at the last election, who only lost by a few hundred votes in the end, or Giselle Kaptarian in Bradfield, who came so close they had to count and recount those votes. Nicole Flint in Boothby. I mean, there were just Maggie Forrest and Ryan. These were just extraordinary women, really, really strong performers. And I'd like to see those women run again, and I'd like to see more of them in other seats as well.
Electorally, winning female votes requires action at the policy level, and I think that Labor has managed to target its policy very effectively to the women's vote. What areas are the Liberals likely to be looking at here, just in broad terms?
I know how important it is to understand nuance in policy development to allow for Australian women to be fully enfranchised into our economy and into our society. And I introduced a number of policies myself that would allow for that to happen. But I do think that probably the big ticket item is, and I hate to say it because it really is a family issue, not a women's issue, is childcare, because it is one of those enabling policies that allows women to come back to work. The problem is, of course, at the moment, we really do have a one-size-fits-all approach to childcare, unless it is the standard childcare model. then there is no offering, which really diminishes choice. And of course, every family is different. And now we have a situation too where there are childcare deserts. So there are communities that simply don't have access to that one-size-fits-all model. There are particular careers that for which it doesn't work. I mean, if you're a policewoman and you work strange shifts, well, childcare centre isn't going to work for you. So how can we create something that is more flexible, but also delivers what we want in a quality childcare centre, making sure that our children are well looked after and have those precious early learning years that, we know that can benefit so many of them. So that will be our focus.
Just before you go on, are we talking here about, for example, vouchers, and are you attracted to the idea of subsidising nannies?
Look, I'm not going to. This is not my portfolio, and I wouldn't dream of, announcing policies that are in somebody else's portfolio. But I do know that there is a consensus in our party room that something's got to give. And the reason why something has got to give is because at the moment, childcare, that one-size-fits-all approach, is costing the budget around $16 billion a year. It's the fastest growing area, one of the fastest growing areas of the budget, a huge financial burden for future generations. But at the same time, it's not really delivering on its promise. We're subsidising the workers and we're subsidising users. That's unsustainable. So what is the model? I can't tell you that, but I do know that there must be a better way.
We talked about Farrer, a regional seat where the Liberals will be very concerned about one nation. But more broadly, how does the party juggle trying to get back these voters that have drifted off to one nation, or perhaps marched rather than drifted is a better way of putting it, while also competing with the city teals that have been, of course, entrenched over the last couple of elections?
Well, they're not entirely incongruous. Australians at the moment are rightly aggrieved. They're aggrieved because their standard of living has gone backwards. The cost of living has skyrocketed. Their mortgages have increased by an enormous amount, and their electricity bills have gone up. And what they are looking for is an alternative to what is clearly a pretty ordinary Labor government. Anthony Albanese, for all his numbers in Parliament, has an incredibly low primary vote. It's broad representation in Parliament, but it's very, very shallow. Now, if voters want to park their votes elsewhere, find an alternative, they simply weren't finding it in the Liberal Party's offering. I can understand that. We didn't articulate our message and we didn't have a policy suite ready to go that spoke to mainstream Australians. But mainstream Australians will see that from an Angus Taylor-led coalition. And that's why they're parking their vote elsewhere, whether it be with One Nation, who is a party of grievance, so it does attract the aggrieved, or perhaps it's with the Teals because they think that Teals might somehow have a balance of power. In the two terms of government that the Teals, or two terms of Parliament that the Teals have been a feature of our electoral landscape, I'm not entirely sure say that they have personally achieved an awful lot. They make a lot of noise, but to be honest, I think most Australians know that they can't achieve very much. One Nation are trying to obtain a balance of power. While they say they're running in every single seat, I think it will probably be in the Senate where their power comes to the fore. My objective is to make sure that we speak to every Australian, not a sectional interest. I'm not interested in going after big business. I'm not interested in going after unionised workforces. I just want to speak to Australian families, individuals, to small businesses, people that are trying to get ahead, that would rather like the way to be paved for them just so it's a little bit easier. They're not expecting handouts. They're not expecting the solutions to every problem, but they would like things to be a little bit easier for them and then for government to get out of their lives. That, I think, is the Australian way. Liberal values are reflective of mainstream Australia values, but it's up to us to be able to demonstrate that with both our communications, but also a policy suite that recognises that.
But isn't one of your problems that Australians now don't want governments to get out of their lives? They want governments to do more, to provide more services, to be in their lives, and that contradicts some of the principles of the Liberal Party.
I do think that there has been an objective, if you like, of dependency that has been part of the Labor Party's tactics of government. But that's not healthy. And we can see it in something like childcare. That's the best example, isn't it? We all need to have our kids looked after, but if there is only one size fits all, well, then that one single childcare policy solution becomes, our entire focus. That's, I don't think, is good enough. We need to make sure that we encourage innovation and aspiration, that we reward effort, so that when people want to step up and say, hey, I'd really like to start a business, I'd really like to start a family, I'm going to work really hard so that I can send my child to the school that I choose, that there are opportunities for families and individuals to do exactly that. One size fits all approach is, it makes the place a little grayer. I'd like to inject some optimism and some colour back into the Australian economy and to society.
Isn't there a difference, though, between rejecting the one size fits all approach and saying that people want government out of their lives? They may want them in their lives, but providing that flexible support.
Well, we know that there is an enormous amount of pressure on services right now. And I think that Australians rightly expect services that is part of the social contract. You pay your taxes and you get the services that you expect. But that's not happening right now for a number of different reasons. One of them is potentially that immigration has run out of control, particularly over the last couple of years. Having 500,000 people come to the country each year is putting pressure on everything from roads through to infrastructure, through to our health system, through to our housing market. And you can understand why people want the government to do something about that, because they're seeing their way of life eroded. That's why Angus Taylor is determined to make sure that we protect Australians' way of life, the promise of our nation, but we also restore their standard of living, which has been slowly eroded over the last 4 years. And that's going to be the focus, the relentless focus of the new frontbench lineup from the coalition.
I just want to return to Pauline Hanson, One Nation, for a minute. Pauline Hanson this week called you elitist and a snob over a quip that you made when you said some time ago that if you defected to the Nationals, you'd have to speak a lot slower and talk about the regions more often. Do you regret that attempt at humour?
I thought it was reasonably funny. Look, if you can't make jokes about your friends, I'm not entirely sure who you can make jokes about. My friends in the National Party took it for what that quip was, which was a little dig at them. Some of my best friends in the Parliament are National Party parliamentarians. They didn't take offence. The fact that Pauline Hanson, though, has come out and decided to make it personal, I think is interesting. I didn't realise she'd done this, but I'm getting some feedback about it today. I think that's a sign that perhaps One Nation are a little bit nervous about the new coalition lineup, because let's face it, the greatest threat to One Nation's advance is a strong, articulate coalition that takes votes off of them rather than the other way around. So if Pauline Hanson's running scared, I bring that on. I think that's terrific.
Perhaps you can have a latte with her if you run into her when campaigning in Farrer. I think Aubrey would have cafes serving plenty of lattes.
I'm absolutely certain that they do. And in fact, look, after I made that joke and said that I enjoyed good coffee too much, that was, I got so many invitations to have a cup of coffee in the regions. So and it really was a joke. Of course, they have good coffee in the regions. But I'm looking forward to the taste testing anyway. I think we should turn it into a national competition.
Now, by July this year, you'll have been in Parliament for 10 years.
I know.
How have
Gosh.
you personally changed in that time, and what changes have you observed around you?
Well, I think I'm far less naive. I did come in sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, nothing but a ponytail and a dream. And I did feel at that stage too that perhaps my business experience would translate over easily to politics. They are very different beasts. Yes, the work that I'd done in the private sector became very handy in policy development, particularly around superannuation and financial services. But
This was in the financial sector.
that's right. But politics is a completely different environment, a completely different culture. And you can understand why. In business, when teams work together well, you can be part of the boat that rises on the tide. Politics is a little bit more of a zero-sum game. One in, one out. You're either the party of government or the party of opposition. You're, in the ministry or out of the ministry. It is very much one in, one out. And because of that, it can create interesting relationships, challenges that perhaps I hadn't expected before I entered Parliament. But I love it. It's a challenge. What I didn't realise, but I love most about the job, is that every single day is different. Every day is a challenge. You have to get your head around issues that you never considered before. And you attend things and experience things that in any other job you wouldn't do. How has the Parliament changed? And it has over the last 10 years. I think it's a far better workplace now than it was when I first arrived. It's far more welcoming to newcomers and to those that might not necessarily fit the cookie cutter mould of an Australian politician. And it makes for a better workplace. I genuinely love it. I have made incredibly good friends within the Parliament, both within my own party and across the aisle as well. And I don't regret a single day of the last 10 years. I'm looking forward to the next 10.
While you say it's a better workplace, would you also think that standards in the House are, if anything, worse than they were a decade ago? And perhaps there's less of a collegial feeling among members generally, not just among the party members.
I think that might not necessarily just be the Parliament. I think that is across society. People are now seem to feel entitled to give strangers free character assessments, whether it be online or sometimes in person. There's a lot more anger out there. I find that disappointing. When Parliament works well, we work together, and we have done that so many times. I think that people misunderstand the Parliament too, the performative aspect of the bits that they see on television, compared to the 95% of work that we do that is bipartisan, often tripartisan. That's a really important part of what it is that we do. So I would hope that people can see the good parts of their Parliament's work, not just the aggressive or the confrontational bits, because it's an amazing place. We should be very proud of the democracy we have, the checks and balances that are embedded into our system, and what we can achieve when it works well.
You mean people are behaving better behind the scenes than in front of the cameras?
Often that is very much the case. It reminds me of that Warner Brothers cartoon back in the day with the coyote and the sheepdog that come in and clock on in the mornings, morning Ralph, morning Sam, box on for a while and chase the sheep around, and then at the end of the day when the whistle blows they clock off again and say, "See you tomorrow, Sam. See you tomorrow, Ralph."
I'll think of that next time watching Question Time. Now, we often ask our guests for some reading tips, and I wonder what you've been reading this year.
Oh, well, look, can I tell you, I'm actually a member of a book group. I am the worst book group member that ever existed. I am always behind. So over the last summer, I've actually been embedding myself into a whole series of novels, which I haven't done for such a long time. But I am loving it. I often fall asleep when I'm reading, so I tend to use audiobooks when I'm on aeroplanes and things to try and catch up. But I've read a series by David Nichols that have been fantastic. My favourite one for the summer was something called You Are Here, which was a beautiful book, really beautiful book. And I'm reading one at the moment called The Names by a woman named Florence Knapp, which is the same characters but in 3 different circumstances, changed only by a choice of a name for their baby, which is fascinating too.
Now, just to finish on a light note, we were rather intrigued by your social media showing you making themed cocktails with a political twist. How did you come upon this style of social media, and is there a new one in the works?
Look, I think that I should do a new one. It's probably about time. I've only done 3 over the last 10 years, but somehow I've turned into, the Parliament's barista. I'm not barista, mixologist, isn't it? That's what they're called now, mixologist. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. Look, the first one was
They
actually
seem well laced from your description.
the first one I ever did was at 5 p.m. on a Friday during COVID lockdowns. And at that stage, I think everybody deserved a Friday afternoon drink during COVID lockdowns. And then I did one during the election campaign with ingredients from different electorates, which was a bit of fun. And then finally, I did one using mangoes, largely because I'd done another social media post where I was making breakfast and I'd cut a mango in a particular way. And I got more comments about that mango and the way that I'd cut it than anything else. And people asked me what I'd done with the other half. So I made a cocktail with a mango. It's a bit of fun. I don't take myself very seriously. I take my job very seriously. And I take the obligations that I have to the people that have put me in the parliament extremely seriously. I really want a better country and a better place for the next generation to come. But I think at the same time, you can do so demonstrating that you're human like everybody else and you can have a laugh at yourself.
Jane Hume, thank you very much for talking with the Conversations Politics podcast. That's all for today. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. We'll be back with another interview soon, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please, Pauline?
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland
We are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
to the heart of Australian politics, this is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out. Now, no one's laughing.
One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation.
I'm back.
This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.